Paul Verhoeven has said in interviews that the meaning of Total Recall is really up to the viewer, whether or not they think that the entire movie is Doug Quaid's recall trip, or if it's actually the story of a sleeper agent named Hauser who becomes Quaid to infiltrate the Martian resistance. Which is actually not true, because any careful viewer who watches the film will notice that it tips its hand many times throughout that the events happening in the movie are objective reality, and that Doug Quaid is Hauser. The reason we can tell this is because the audience is privy to conversations and scenes that Doug Quaid would not experience, like Mr. Cohagen and Richter talking to one another, or the staff at Recall trying to figure out what to do with Doug Quaid when Hauser wakes up, and so on. But the only problem with this interpretation is Doug Quaid going to Recall. Why would that have been allowed to happen? Why wouldn't Doug Quaid be on a blacklist for going to Recall if it was going to cause an issue? So the real question to understand Total Recall is not whether the events are real or not. The real question is, how is Cohagen and Hauser's plan supposed to work? This is my theory. Hauser had already infiltrated the Martian resistance, but was unable to locate Quado. So, assuming the members of the Martian resistance know that Mr. Cohagen apparently regularly erases people's memories, Hauser is given the false identity of Quaid and put back on Earth, surrounded by various agents who are watching him. Agents who don't know his actual identity, including Richter. Now, in Quaid's flashback, where he sees the Martian machine underground, we can see that Richter is there. But we notice that up until Hauser's identity is actually revealed later in the film, Richter has no idea who Quaid actually is. So we have to assume that Mr. Cohagen erased Richter's memory of Hauser. In fact, we might as well assume that Cohagen erased the memories of any of his agents who knew Hauser on Mars. For two reasons. One, if the agents knew he was Hauser, they might hesitate, given that Hauser is a lethal killing machine, or maybe because they had some loyalty to him. And two, if they don't know that Quaid is a lethal killing machine, they'd be more likely to be sloppy, giving Quaid the upper hand in almost every situation, which is what happens. Next, we have to assume that Doug Quaid had implanted in his personality a desire to go to Mars, and that the agents around him are instructed to subtly discourage him from doing this, presumably to make sure the implanted desire actually works. We also have to assume that not only does Doug Quaid have a desire to go to Mars, but he also has a desire to go to Mars through Recall. Now, why is that important? Because when Doug visits Recall, that is when all of the agents who are watching him get activated to kill him. And the real question is, why? He goes to Recall, he wakes up as Hauser. Hauser says, "You've blown my cover." They shoot him full of tranquilizers, and then he wakes up as Doug Quaid again. So what happened there? What was the big deal? My theory is Doug Quaid's false personality is programmed in such a way that if he goes to Recall and they try to implant memories of Mars in his brain, this will trigger a subroutine buried in his personality, basically unlocking his combat training and killer instincts, which we can assume are dormant when he's Doug Quaid, up until that point. So all of this is really an over-elaborate way to ensure that when Doug Quaid arrives at the Martian resistance, he believes completely that people have been trying to kill him, and not only that, but is willing to use lethal force on behalf of the resistance to convince them that he's completely sincere. And that, I think, explains everything. Of course, there might still be a couple of nagging questions, like why, if Quado was such an advanced psychic, why he couldn't tell that Hauser's personality was submerged below Doug Quaid's, or why Mr. Cohagen couldn't think of a less elaborate plot to do away with Quado or the Resistance. If you have control of the entire Martian military, as he seems to, and you know that the Resistance is operating out of one bar that has one secret exit leading out of it. Yeah, anyway. And the other question of why Doug Quaid's ego trip would include actual details that happen later in the movie, like him meeting Melina and Blue Sky on Mars. For that, we'd have to assume that Hauser's actual memories were incorporated into the recall programs, which isn't really a stretch if you assume that Mr. Cohagen has some control over the company. And if you consider that after Quado regresses Quaid and brings up the memory of the machine, Quaid suddenly knows that the machine makes air. So we have to assume that Hauser knew that, somehow. Or that the recall sim programmers made a really lucky guess, or were psychic themselves. Hey, at the end of the day, all this stuff could be more easily explained by the director and writer just deliberately breaking the continuity to have fun. So now your choice is, do you want to live in that reality or the one I laid out? Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next time.